I hired a lot of individuals when I was at Waters because I was also building the quality team there. And I hired individuals with 10, 15 years experience. If you tried to get into that middle, like 4 to 10 years, it became really difficult. So you either went for senior roles or you went for fresh college grads. And what I found when I moved to Sweden was there were some of the same dynamics, but it's funny. In Sweden,
All right, we're live on another episode of Life Sciences 360, and today I have with me Aaron Snyder. Aaron is the head of quality at Fresenius Kabi, and he's also a lead faculty and a trainer for FDA and industry professionals at AAMI. So I'm really glad to have him on the show. Welcome to the show, Aaron.
thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
Yeah, it's I don't come across a lot of people who are training FDA professionals. So I want to start by asking you, what sort of training do you provide to FDA and industry professionals?
Yeah, so in 2014, I applied to AAMI. So it's the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation. So they do a lot of training for industry. And I have taken a handful of AMI courses before this. I applied to become a faculty member and I went through a train to trainer program and I was selected to join the AMI faculty. And we basically train industry and FDA on the quality system regulation, so 820, and also 1345. And then we do deep dives into various topics. So I teach Kappa, I teach 510K course, I teach the purchasing controls course and the design controls course. So all of those courses I've been able to teach industry and FDA for the past 7 years. It's been great.
Great. And what is the format of all these trainings? Is it mostly virtual, assuming last couple of years with COVID and everyone being remote, but what can you walk us through some of the formats that you implement these trainings?
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, it was always in the classroom. And Amy fluctuated between having them at various cities around the US and then also having them in Alexandria, Virginia. So it required travel. And that was a little bit more of a challenge if it required travel and to do my day job. So when I was at Waters Corporation or when I was at Manlica or even Fresenius Kabi, if you have to travel to go to the training, well, then you're away from the site and it can cause some problems. But once the pandemic hit and they went fully remote, then it became there was a more flexibility without that travel to take on more training assignments. So since the pandemic, everything has been remote with the exception of a few classes. So at the end of last year, so I'd say Q3, Q4, 2022, we did have some hybrid classes where it was virtual and in the classroom. And I actually led a design control course at the beginning of December that had 40 people in the classroom and 35 in the virtual. And that has its own challenges as well. But
Right.
it was fantastic to be back in the classroom. You get so much energy from the people in the classroom.
Yeah, it reminds me about meetings as well. That's how I feel. I've been into consulting and pretty much I started consulting last year, but even before that, when I was an employee for pretty much of 2020 and 2021, never went into office. And actually last week I went to one of my client sites in North Carolina that I'm working with. And I was there for 2 hours and it just felt strange, but it was nice to be in a room with people because there's nothing that can replace that.
Yeah, it's a different energy, right? Of course, you have the hassle. I had to leave the day before the training. You have to fly back the next time, but that energy of being in the classroom with a group of people learning a subject, it's great. It's fantastic.
So when you're doing these trainings, I'm speaking from like an industry standpoint. I've been in a lot of QMS trainings as a trainer and as a recipient of the training. And I don't want to put a number out there or make a judgment, but a lot of times these trainings can get really, maybe boring is not the right word, but not well received, right?
Right.
Because you have the great information, but everything is like text heavy and you feel like you're giving all the information, but it's not getting received from the person that's taking the training. So Have you seen some of these challenges with any of your trainings, or has the audience come and said like, "Oh, I didn't get this part. Maybe you should have drawn a flow chart or something."
Yeah, so you highlight a really excellent point, which is we're talking about some boring stuff, right? Like regulations, they're not sexy, right? And sometimes, and they're written sometimes legalese. You get into the EU MDR, you get into 1345, you get into 820, and some of it is more struggling for the word here, but it's more abstract. Sometimes they give you a lot of leeway with some of the wording that they use, but also some of the wording people are like, I just don't understand at all what you're saying. So you've got to take that complex material and you've got to basically boil it down and present it in a manner that someone with 0 years experience, so fresh college grad, they can grasp it, or someone with 30 years experience, they can get something out of it. So at the beginning of our Amy courses, we always poll the audience. We find out, okay, how many of you are 0 to 2 years? How many of you are 3 to 5? On down the line. But on top of that, the Amy curriculum is built around, okay, so there is a lecture component, then there are workshops, and there are buzz sessions. So we try to change it up, the flow. And unless you have like a private course where Amy comes into your company and does training locally, you'll normally have two faculties. So if you do a private course and you have more than 20 attendees, you could probably get two faculty, but it does depend on the number of attendees. So every hour will change the faculty up. So you'll get not only a different presentation style, but also a different skill set and background for that Amy faculty, because we all have worked at different companies in different locations and we're all experts in different areas. So we try to break it up from that standpoint. My own, I don't like lectures. Now, granted, I may have 30 slides that I have to go through, but the slides, that's not the presentation. The presentation is me. Like, and what I've got to do is I've got to put the slide up. I've got to tell you what the slide says without reading it. Like, now, granted, if there are definitions, you need to read the definitions. Like, I can't tell you my opinion of a definition. But if it's, you'll have a CAPA procedure and the CAPA procedure will have this information in it, well, I can tell you, okay, well, that's the regulatory language. This is what it means. Like, if I'm talking to you on the street, this is how I'm going to explain it. Okay. And I try to boil it down so that you can grasp it at a simple level. I try to make it as simple as possible, plain language, and then back that up with a lot of examples. So, personal examples from my background, or examples I've heard other faculty share, or the class itself sharing those examples. And I would say what sets the Amy courses apart, now you do get this in some other courses as well, is it's always a conversation, a discussion. So you can at any time ask a question. And I'm going to be like, okay, great. If that question is on topic, I'm going to answer it. I may throw it out to the class and start a discussion on it because we have built time into the training to allow for long discussions on various topics and we can still cover all the material. Now, granted, if we're 3 slides in and you've asked 7 questions that have taken up a lot of time, well, then I may have to say, okay, let's table that. We'll come back to that at lunch. Okay, we'll get there, right? So but we try to keep it engaging. And you are right. If it's death by PowerPoint, I'm out. You're going to lose me.
Yeah.
So you've got to find a way to keep it engaging.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you also added a great point, which is about making it more of a conversation and not too as much of a training, because I'm sure that when you're giving the training, people come in from different backgrounds, different companies. You might work at a 500% company, but somebody who's working at a 20% company, even though they're in the same sector, they might see different challenges and different issues. And you might learn something from a question that you can use to make the training better for the next batch. So, yeah, so I agree that, the conversational format I like that kind of format because it keeps you alert.
Right?
You know that somebody can say, "Hey, Harsh, what do you think about that? Like,
Yep.
what are your thoughts?" So I like that format too.
Yeah, and you try to, so as you start to approach a topic, like we'll present some entry information, and then I like to pose questions. So I'll ask a question. And my question is meant to take someone from, okay, here, I have this bit of information and I need to get over to here. Okay. And I want them to do that journey on their own. I mean, I could tell them, you go here, 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 but then that's how I think. And that's how I made the journey. But if I throw the question out and then they're all thinking about it, I'll pause for a long time. And then I'm like, I need some help here. Someone's got to start talking. And then, of course, there's always someone that'll speak up and they'll add their 2 cents. And then you get a few others. And then you're engaging everyone. You're keeping everyone part of the discussion.
Okay. Do you like naturally, do you like doing this type of stuff like training or just taking a big topic and breaking it down, or is that come to you naturally? Because I know a lot of people have other things like public speaking and communication that becomes a challenge even though they might have the expertise to train somebody on a topic.
Yeah. So in my background, my father he worked in the trades. He was an elevator mechanic. My mother was a teacher. So I've grown up kind of with education being very important and always going out and learning more, trying to learn as much as you can about various topics and then moving on to a new topic and learn about that. So when I got out into industry and I started to identify mentors and people that I could learn from and just try to absorb as much as possible. And I started with, okay, I'm going to be in quality assurance, which, let's be frank, one of your earlier podcasts, there is no degree for quality assurance. Like they pick up people from management, they pick up people from sciences, computer science, engineering, chemistry, biology. Like there is no specific career path there. Someone's like, you know what, I want to go into compliance and auditing. It's like, it's that doesn't exist. So I happened to get into a quality role when I was in a co-op in college, and I was like, oh well, this is pretty good. I think this would be all right. So we just happened to end up in quality assurance, and then some of that education I got from my mother about continuing to evolve and learning more, I started to take classes through the American Society of Quality, so ASQ. And I took Six Sigma Black Belt, I took quality engineer courses. And at that point, I was learning from all of these great people that I worked with. I was learning in the classroom. And it just became a point to where, okay, now I'm starting to lead teams and I've got to teach this to my teams. So because people didn't understand basics of quality assurance. They didn't understand statistical process control, lean manufacturing, whatever it is, problem solving. And when you get down to the nuts and bolts of quality assurance, what do? We solve problems. We protect the company from unacceptable risks, right? And then as a byproduct of that, hopefully we're compliant with the regulations. Like we've got to be the champion for compliance in itself, but quality and compliance, they are completely different. They can support each other, but they are not the same. Like you can have compliance and have terrible quality. And you can also have really good quality but not be compliant to some regulation. So there is a balance there that we have to find. So I just naturally started to lead more teams as I grew up into leadership roles. And then it was educating my teams and bringing them up and helping them understand the requirements, because what I've found is if you can understand the regulatory requirements, if you can understand the concepts of quality assurance, well, then you can develop processes that facilitate compliance, not bureaucratic processes that force compliance on people, because then everyone hates it. Ah, you're forcing me into it. Like we need to write the processes so that they facilitate compliance, they're easy to follow, and that's hard. That's really hard. And you got to be confident in the requirements in order to get there.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah, you made a couple of good points there. The distinction between quality and compliance and how you can have one but completely be missing out of the other. I also want to ask you you're already doing all of these trainings. And as I was doing some research on your profile, I found that you also have a YouTube channel. So
Yeah.
do you love training that much that even though you're doing so much with AMI, you also have a YouTube channel? So what was the motivation behind, it's called Quality Systems Explained,
Quality
is that?
systems
Yeah.
explained. Yeah. So background here, right? So I've been training people within companies for the last 15 years. And then the last 7 years, I joined Amy and I've been training industry. I've been training FDA. And in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of work with FDA, developing training material for their transition over to 1345. And in 2000, I got to a point to where I was like, I was preparing a site for an FDA inspection, and I was helping the site leaders, so the site managers, but also some new hires on my team. I was walking them through, like, okay, this is what the FDA is going to look for. We're using QSIT, quality system inspection technique. And as I go through, I'm asking them questions. I'm having them think through the processes and helping them learn. I was like, you know what? There's probably a need for more of this generally out in the industry. And I thought to myself, you know what? There's kind of two things that I wanted to do. I've always wanted to grow into an executive role. At this time, I was already a director of quality, but I had my eye on the VP of QA position, or long-term consulting and working with the executives around strategy, regulatory strategy, quality assurance strategy, those types of things. And there was kind of two things rolling around in my mind. Not only, okay, how can I take some of this knowledge that I have and share it with a wide amount of people, but also how can I kind of slow motion interview for that job that I want on down the road, right? And it's not building a brand, but it's kind of building a brand, right? It's like, how do you establish yourself as someone who has credibility, knows their stuff, and is sharing that knowledge with those out in the industry? So I was like, all right, I'll do some videos on YouTube. Let's see where this goes. And I'll start with 820. And then I talked to a bunch of my friends and I did a few mock-up videos. And I'd never made a video in my life, and I'm setting my iPhone up, I'm recording, I'm watching YouTube videos on how to edit, so I'm doing all my own editing. My mic was terrible. I'm working on sound. Like, so I did this for 3, 4 months, and then I was writing scripts. So I wrote a bunch of scripts, and then I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it. So I set it all up, and I recorded 20 videos, and I did all the editing, and I started to slowly post them up on YouTube. And I was like, look, I'm just going to walk through 820. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to go clause by clause, or it's section by section in the regulation. I'm going to go section by section, and I'm going to do an executive summary. So if I'm an executive purchasing, accounts payable, CFO, if I'm a sales executive, like, what do I need to know about management review? Okay, well, I'm going to tell you in like 2 minutes. Okay, so introduce the requirement, tell you what the requirement is in 5 words. Here's what the requirement means, what's good look like, what's bad look like, and then I'll give some bonus questions. So that's kind of the format. And I'll release one video a week. Okay. Well, I'm like 120 videos in now, and I've had
Wow.
100 questions around, oh, can you do a video on this? I'd be like, I'd love to. I just don't know when I'm going to fit it in. And I've also been thinking about, okay, well, I really enjoy auditing. So I happen to be mentored by an amazing quality auditor and quality leader when I worked at Covidian and when I worked at Waters. And I want to take a lot of the knowledge that that individual helped me learn, and I want to come up with another series of videos about auditing and about breaking it down into those small bite-sized chunks around, okay, how can you be a better auditor? Okay, if we're talking about this section, here's what we do. If we're talking about this section, here's what we do. So I've got a lot of ideas. I don't have the time because I have a full-time job. I'm teaching for Amy. I have to make my videos. There's a lot that goes to it. I'm a dad too. I got my kids.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, your journey kind of reminds me of how I started first creating content. You mentioned that somewhere in that journey you felt like you were building a brand, or you were basically answering questions that you possibly could get in a C-level quality assurance role, but you were answering them to like the free audience on the internet and just teaching them. So yeah, there's a lot of effort that goes into creating any type of content, whether it's video or writing on social media and stuff like that. And the biggest thing I've learned from other people who've been doing this for way too long is just the consistency. So you mentioned 100 plus videos. That is like, that's right there. That's consistent approach that you have. And I hope that you go into the next phase of the auditing part. You kind of answered my question. I was going to ask you, how do you plan, like, what topics to create? So it sounds like you're getting a lot of recommendations from your audience on what topic they want next.
Yeah, yeah. So I started with, like I said, just clause by clause through the regulation or section by section. And I did all of device. I got up to 100 videos. And I did some focus videos on process validation. I did some other focus videos. And then on sterilization. And then it's like, okay, I need to branch over into pharma. So I had done 18 years in the medical device space, and then I went to Fresenius Kabi because I wanted to move into pharma, and I really wanted to bridge pharma and device because that's the future of where it's all going. We're going to start to biotech is both device, biologics, pharma together, and we're only going to see more of that as we go. And I wanted to work in both spaces. So now I'm starting to walk through 211. Well, 211 is bigger than 820. It's got more information that has to be covered. So I'm just now at the very beginning of that. So it's going to take me a while to churn my way through 211. But once I'm done with 211, I've got other series. So I have the executive series for device, the executive series for pharma. I want to do something in auditing. I want to do something on leadership. I thought your first podcast around, okay, I don't remember the individual's name, but he was talking about, okay, how do I get into biotech? How do I get into quality assurance? Okay. Like I think that's fantastic. And we all have our own journeys around how we got here, how we picked up a mentor here or there that not only taught us, but supported us, lended us credibility. So I want to take that and I want to see how I can help others not only further their career, but also hopefully at the end of the day, we have better quality systems and we have safer devices out in the marketplace. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I have to watch out for when you start posting about 211, because that's one of my favorite regulations. I work in software validation and computer systems and data integrity, all of
okay.
that stuff with pharma and biotech companies. So 211 and part 11 kind of pretty much come up in every conversation, or I'm reviewing a procedure. So those are kind of the two favorite ones that I pretty much know them of the most of the requirements there. So I'll be watching out when you start creating stuff around that.
All right. I've got a part 11 video up, but it's more for device focused. But I'll get to data integrity. So there's stuff there.
Great, great. So what's next? So you are currently in head of quality role. Uh, are you managing a team, or what are you looking for next in that role, or what's your future career goals outside of what you do with AAMI?
Yeah, so in 2019, I moved to Europe. I went to Sweden on an expat assignment, and I was there for basically 4 years. I did 2 years at the original company, Manlika Healthcare is the name of that company, as their global quality system director, where I was in charge of a 45-person team, and I was tasked with harmonizing their quality system across all of their manufacturing sites. So I was working on implementing master control and doing a lot of work there. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, um, that contract wasn't renewed. So I ended up landing a job at Fresenius Kabi as the head of quality assurance at their manufacturing site in Halden, Norway. And we were already 15 months into the pandemic. No, it might have been 14 months. Doesn't matter. Right at the 1 year mark of the pandemic, a little bit over. And they had a lot of stress on the organization. There was a high amount of turnover. It was the demand for generic pharmaceuticals was through the roof because of the because of the pandemic, and the quality system needed some help. So when I came in, I was tasked with not only basically building the talent back up, so getting all the staff back in place, educating that staff. The, in Europe, to release pharmaceuticals, you have to have qualified persons to release those pharmaceuticals, and we went from 6 qualified persons down to 3, and it put a huge strain on the organization. So working through that, defining a strategy for addressing those staffing needs, and then taking a look at the quality system and saying, okay, well, here are the improvements we need to drive in the quality system. So I was able to get the executive support and drive the improvement that we needed. So now the site is in much better shape. We've got all the positions filled. We're training a lot of new people, and it's just been a great overall experience. So from that standpoint, I have decided that I'm moving back to the US and I will be leaving Fresenius Kabi. I'm in the process of leaving Fresenius Kabi right now. I have hired my successor, and she's taking over the quality group this month. So the quality team in Halden was about 55 individuals with a few consultants on top of that. So it was a big organization, and the site itself had 600 employees in it. So yeah.
I have to ask you this. I don't know many people that have worked in US and then left and worked abroad. When you are working with QA team members or hiring candidates on your team, what have you noticed from like a cultural perspective? Like, what do you look for in a team member? What did you see in like Europe versus your time back in US? Did you notice like any differences?
Yeah, so I hired a lot of individuals when I was at Waters because I was also building the quality team there. And I hired, individuals with 10, 15 years experience. If you tried to get into that middle, like 4 to 10 years, it became really difficult. So you either went for senior roles or you went for fresh college grads. And what I found at in when I moved to Sweden was there were some of the same dynamics, but it's funny. In Sweden, they speak English extremely well. Like they're taught English from a very young age. And if it's a bunch of Swedes, they'll speak Swedish. But the minute I would come around, they would start speaking English, no problem. And I I posted a role in Sweden that I'd hired in the U.S. twice, an internal audit coordinator. So someone to run my internal audit program. I post this in Sweden, and I get 0 applicants. Like, what's going on? Like, and I come to find out that coordinator in Sweden means secretary. Like no one wants to be a secretary for the internal audit program. So I had to actually change the title to get the candidates that I wanted. So there are some differences there that you got to pay attention to. And then when I get to Norway, which it's really strange that they share that long border. You go into Norway and then okay, they want the coordinator title. It's like you guys live beside each other. Like, but and one thing I found really interesting is when I told the Swedes that I was going to Norway to work at Fresenius Kabi, they all have their stereotypes about the Swedes versus the Norwegians versus the Danish versus the Germans, and it's funny how they talk about each other. So, but yeah, I learned a lot, and each country kind of has its own approach, and the Swedes, I enjoyed working with all of them. So I really enjoyed my time in Sweden.
Yeah, and what's now that you're coming back to US, hopefully getting to another senior level position, outside of like non-work related, what was like your biggest memory or takeaway or something that you loved being abroad, and what's one thing that you missed being away from US?
Yeah, so of course the food. Now Sweden and Norway, they have great food.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can't get the really unhealthy food that you can get in the U.S. in Europe. It just doesn't exist. You can't go to Chipotle and get a monster burrito. They just don't exist, right? The
Yep.
pizza in Europe is different, especially Sweden, than the U.S. So I missed a lot of things about the food. Within Sweden in general, I was there during the pandemic, and the Swedish government did not lock down. at all. So it was left up to citizens to decide how they wanted to approach the pandemic. And the schools were in session the entire time. So my kids were in school the whole time. And since Sweden didn't do any lockdown measures, every country around it shut down, like the border, like we were trapped in Sweden. So one of my hobbies is I like to hike a lot. I like to get out into nature and I like to climb mountains. So I was driving to northern Sweden and up into the Arctic Circle, and I would spend 3, 4 days hiking a bunch of high peaks, big mountains, and then coming back to Gothenburg and working for the week. So I was able to get out and see the countryside, and I actually hiked to the highest mountain in Sweden 3 times, 3 years in a row. And then this past summer, I did the highest mountain in Norway as well. So it was great.
Yep, interesting. I moved from Washington to California and then to North. Now I live in North Carolina. But while I was in Washington, that was like the only time in my life when I actually went out and like did activities that I could say were related to hiking. Because Washington, I mean, Seattle,
Yeah.
Washington, it's a beautiful state
Yep.
and people love doing that stuff. So I was like, okay, everyone's doing it. My friends are there. So yeah, so that's when you talk about hiking, that's what I remember. I was in Europe probably when I was in high school for a family vacation.
Yep.
So went to Switzerland and did something, some sort of hiking, but I've always wanted to go back and I would love to like, especially with family and kids, it's hard even when you get an opportunity. Like I've interviewed for a role in Switzerland for a pharmaceutical company and even bounced the idea with my wife like, what do you think, should we move there? And she shut it down right away. So but yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you were able to have that phase in your life.
Yeah, and it's great that you brought up your wife because I got an email about the job in Sweden, and I was like, "Oh, this job looks fantastic, but I can't move to Sweden. Can I do it remotely?" And the recruiter came back and said, "Oh, well, they'll do an expat assignment. They're open to that." And I was like, "Okay." So I talked to my wife, and she was like, "Sure, let's do it." I was like, "Okay, let's see what happens." So it's all about timing, right?
Yep.
And I needed to move back to the US within the next year or two anyway because of where my kids are in their school. I don't want to move them during high school. So if I would have stayed another year and a half, I would have been there for another 6 years because my kids have to get through school. I don't want to move them in when they're in high school.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's great that you're able to get through all of that and plan and come back to US. And what I want to ask you, I know we have only a little bit of time left, but I want to just ask you about the quality assurance role from your overall career working in QA, training people in QA. Um, what do you what do you see how do you see quality assurance evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so there's been so much change since 2015. So we had ISO 9000 change, and it basically became super nebulous and not really worth a lot. And then you had 1345 go through a revision, and it harmonized itself with 820. And then we have MDSAP come along, and MDSAP taking all the 5 countries, putting the requirements together in one audit model. It's great. Canada requires it. So we all had to get ready for MDSAP. And then the beast, the biggest one out of them all, we get the MDR out of Europe and the IVDR. And everyone is still running around with their hair on fire because there's so many requirements in that regulation, and it's very complex, and there's a lot of stuff in there that are probably going to cost a lot of money and not give us safer devices. So, but we could talk about that on another whole session. But there's a lot in those regulations. So Europe is probably going to take a while to kind of digest what they have coming, but it's just going to continue to change and evolve, and probably at a faster pace. So we have AI coming on now, and it's going to be used everywhere. I mean, everyone wants it. It's the hot thing. It's the crypto of a few years ago when everyone was in the crypto. So you see all of those applications. So you have all of the regulations evolving more quickly and all of the changes. Then you have the use of technology in the space. So whether it's AI, whether it's personalized medicine, it's the merging of device and pharma because you need the delivery system for the new therapeutics. There's just so much that's going to all hit the industry. And we kind of got spoiled from 2003 to 2016 when 1345 didn't change because the only thing we had to worry about was a random document from the GHTF, Global Harmonization Task Force, about some new guidance. Okay, there was a new guidance for 510Ks. And then a couple of years later, there might be another new guidance around Kappa. And then a couple of years later, process validate. Like it wasn't coming at us all at once. And then it's just been nonstop. So it's that regulatory change, it's the application of the technology, and then that's going to put more pressure than ever on quality leaders to you got to find your niche because you can't be an expert in everything. And once you find your niche and you become an expert in that area, how do you learn enough about the other areas that you can build a strategy and get a team behind it and execute that strategy? That's what's where quality assurance is going to go. It's going to be strategic quality and it's going to be the regulatory strategies that are going to drive it as we move forward.
Yeah, I think you've really made a great point with all the changes going on in the regulations. Uh, Understanding what is changing and then taking that and applying that to internal organizational processes, then figuring out what I need to change, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
oh, EU came out. Do I care? Yes, I do care. Like, why do I care? What should I change?
Right.
And that activity to me has been done majority over the last decade or so. It has been done by people communicating and getting together, or with help of consultants, or by going to conferences. Like, all of these are good avenues to understand what's changing,
Mm-hmm.
but the speed at which things are changing, we're not going to have the luxury to do that anymore. At some point, we have to use a technology like AI or something else that gives us that intelligence and feeds us, like, hey, this changed. If this changed, here's what you need to change in your system, because the human component is just going to slow us down, and we're not going to be able to catch up with the regulations at the speed which they're changing. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how companies will get in, use technology to understand the changes in their environment. And AI is probably one of the best candidates out there that's going to help a lot of companies.
Yeah, you think of where we were 10 years ago and where we are today, just with companies, right? So you have these mega companies, J&J, Medtronic, Baxter's getting big in the pharma space. You've got the Pfizer's, the AstraZenecas, and whoever. And the bigger the company gets, the harder it is to manage, and the more layers of bureaucracy you have, and it kind of paralyzes the organization. And you get these quality systems where you have okay, we have the local quality system, then we have the divisional quality system, then we have the corporate quality system. And when you get a new guidance document or new regulation that's got to go through all of those, it's a lot of work. And it can't
I'm aware.
right. It can't just be quality's problem. Like it's the organization's problem. Because if it's just quality's problem, it won't get implemented.
Yeah, yeah, I'm aware of this, and I've seen this with many of my consulting clients. And yeah, it's hard to change something like this overnight, as you mentioned, especially with a big company. It's just, I don't want to say it's impossible, but you have to first convince people that they need to change, right? Like, I can go and write a really excellent strategy and say, yeah, implement this AI tool and here's your life's going to be great. But if, 20 people in the room don't agree with that, and only 3 people think that's a great idea, it's not going anywhere. So,
Right. And
yeah.
and you mentioned something there with tools, right? It's great to implement a new tool. But if you don't have a maintenance plan on how you're going to maintain it, the tool will become a burden within a year or two. It'll just become obsolete.
Yep, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, listen, this was really amazing. I love talking to you and understanding what you're doing with all the training, and also learning about your time outside of US and the experiences that you had. Where can people find you and connect with you to talk more or discuss anything that you talked on the show?
Yeah, so you can look me up on LinkedIn, Aaron Snyder, and you'll find me there. I have a YouTube channel, as you said earlier, Quality System Explained, where I have short videos that explain various parts of the quality system itself. I'm going to continue to develop content from there. You can send me an email at wsnyder2 at gmail.com. And just let me know that you listen to the podcast, you had a question, and I'll get back to you. It may not be like the same day, but within a week, I'll get back to you. I may be traveling, I may have something going on, an audit at work, but I still get emails from people that took an Amy class in 2016. And they're like, hey, this is happening at my company and it's about process validation. What should I do? And I'm like, okay, well, based on what you've told me, this is what I think is going on. Or I may ask a few questions so that I can get a few background pieces of information, and then I'll tell you, okay, this is what I think, and you should decide how you want to do it. Maybe do A, maybe do B, maybe do C. There's pros and cons on each one.
Well, yeah, it's really great that you are sharing everything that you've learned over your career and also from other people, your mentors and colleagues. You're sharing that not only through one platform or one method, which is AAMI, but also with your YouTube channel. So we need more people like you and others who are creating different types of content and sharing it, so that the generation that's coming in the next 5 or 10 years is going to have a lot of this content available online that maybe I or you didn't have 15 years ago. Or maybe it was there, but we didn't know how to get to it. But now it's easier. So,
Yeah, yeah, good.
y- any final thoughts you want to add? This was a great conversation.
Hey, thank you for inviting me on. When you reached out to me a couple of weeks ago, I was like, "Oh, Life Sciences 360. I don't know what this is. Let me go check it out." And then I listened to your first two podcasts. I was like, "Hey, this is fantastic. I'd love to go on the show." So thank you for inviting me. I'm grateful that you thought that I could provide something to you and to the community out there, the Life Sciences 360 community. And I'd love to come back if you ever want to talk about a specific topic.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for your time and wish you all the best with your trip coming back to US. And if you are in North Carolina, or if we, wherever you're in a conference or something, I hope to meet you someday in person. All right. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.